Hello, is anybody there? I had a small number of technical difficulties. If you're there and you can hear me and see me, please put a message in the chat so that I know I'm not just talking to myself in a small room. Can you see and or hear me? Well, according to what I can see, there are 2 people watching, which is 2 more than 0, but 20 less than 22. Right, anyone, can you see me? Can you hear me? Please, someone send a message so that I don't know, so that I know that I'm not going mad or something. Is anybody there? Who are my viewers? Please say something, somebody. Da, 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 da. I'm not getting anything. Oh, Bo is here. I see and hear you fine. Right, great. Nice one. Nice one. I wonder if anyone else is going to join. Well, Bo, it says there's 2 people watching. I'm assuming that's 2 people other than me, which means apart from you and me, there is one other person. Would said other person like to identify themselves? Or shall I crack on and... Okay. Well, I tell you what, despite the fact that there are only 2 people, I was anticipating slightly more, but you know, you never can tell. You're a VIP, yeah, absolutely. It's a niche area, I have to admit. But yeah, there we are. Greetings, fellow humans. My name is Alistair Lord, and I am the Renaissance Yorkshireman. And last week at this time, my presentation at the York Festival of Ideas was just beginning, and I put forward quite a lot of different ideas, and I realized that, you know, I didn't go into a lot of detail on a lot of things because, you know, I actually, you know, had about 5 or 6 quite weighty ideas in 1 hour. And I said that I would do a live Q&A the following week. So there was only actually 1 question was posed during the presentation last week. And that was, how would you transition from where we are now, what I'm calling ideological late stage capitalism, to where we want to go, which some people call game B, I call post-capitalism, but game B, post-capitalism is the same thing, essentially. And it's a very pertinent question and a very important question. Now, I can't say for sure what it's going to look like. However, I have thought about it, and I think I can say what an extremely good starting point would be. And we have to start. So, you know, here's a great starting point that is simple and easy. And if we get it right in the first step, everything else becomes simpler later on. for all sorts of reasons, which, some of which I'll go into in some detail. So basically, I'm going to talk about 4 things to answer that question. How do we transition from game A, ideological late-stage capitalist systems that we're in now, to game B, post-capitalist systems, which I talk about in my book, The Tao of Sustainable Development, A New Post-Capitalist Paradigm. So 4 things. The first 2 are related to systems change. The second 2 are related to psychological change or consciousness change or spiritual growth, if you're that way inclined. So the first 2 are the war on drugs and debt-based currencies. Now, we need to stop the war on drugs and we need to get rid of debt-based currencies. If we do those 2 things and nothing else, we will solve more than half the problems of the human race in one fell swoop. I mean, I really can't overestimate how important debt-based currencies are, and using non-debt-based currencies as an alternative, and how important it is stopping the war on drugs, because there's so many problems with them. So those are the 2 systems change things that I want to talk about. The consciousness change, one is related to healing and trauma. We have to have this kind of global healing. Now, some individuals need it more than others, some an awful lot more than others, but we all need it to a certain degree. And the last thing that I'm going to talk about, and what I want to talk about in most detail, is about visualizing what this is going to look like. And this is also related to what a lot of people on YouTube will call manifesting. And it's related to creative visualization meditations. And I'll talk about this in some detail and some different aspects of it. So that's going to be my main focus, is talking about creative visualization meditation and how we can use that to kind of manifest this different world. Right, so that's what I'm talking about. So the systems change. The war on drugs, I mean, it's a complete stitch up, really. It's a war on the working class. It's a war on the poor. I mean, there are some people who would say it's a war on people of color. It affects all races and socioeconomic groups, drugs and the war on drugs. And here's the thing, the evidence is in. The evidence is in. Prohibition doesn't work. It didn't work in Chicago with Al Capone. It didn't work with El Chapo Guzman in Mexico. It didn't work with Pablo Escobar. It didn't work with Kun Sa in Burma. I mean, drugs will find a market because human beings like taking drugs. I mean, they just do. Not everyone, of course, but most people have a preference for some drug or other. Now, I'm including alcohol as a drug, and tobacco and caffeine to a lesser degree, although obviously they're less problematic in many respects. But, some people like taking heroin. I mean, I don't, but there we are. So you're never going to get rid of drugs because it's a natural human need. And the evidence is in. If we look at the Dutch model and the Portuguese model of legalization / decriminalization, everything society gains. In the Portuguese model, Portugal, a couple of years after they decriminalized drugs, there were less addicts, there were less overdosing, AIDS spread fell, there was less street robberies and such like, because they took a health-based approach to drugs, not a enforcement approach to drugs. And the evidence is in. Dr. David Nutt has done a lot of research about this. So stop the war on drugs. It's as simple as that. So that's all I want to say about that. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. But that's all I want to say about the war on drugs. End the war on drugs. The second point about system change that I want to talk about is debt-based currencies. Now, I absolutely cannot stress enough how important this is. The fact of the matter is, we all use, or nearly all of us on planet Earth, use money in some form or another on a daily basis. But but most of us have no clue how it works. Now, I just want to read you a very short, I'm just taking something from my book here, and I've written on page 203, according to mainstream neoclassical economists, there are commonly three possible functions of money that are identified. Number one, as a medium of exchange. Number two, as a unit of account. And number three, as a store of value. So economists are saying there are three possible functions of money. Now, they never talk, or very rarely, mainstream ones don't, some fringe alternative economists, whatever you want to call them, may talk about it. But most of them don't talk about money as a form of social control. Now, I mean, are they blind? I don't know. Are they delusional? Quite possibly. But if you're an economist and this is your job and you don't recognize that money as it currently exists, i.e. debt-based currencies, is a form of social control, you are blind, right? So any economist watching this, go and do your job. I mean, rubbish. So I'll kind of give you a bit of an example of debt-based currencies, because I've talked about this with a few people and most of them really don't understand how it works. But it works something like this. Let's imagine a scenario where there are 20 businesses and they all borrow $1 million from the bank, and the bank charges them 5% interest. So the bank just creates $20 million out of thin air. I mean, they just type it into a computer and there it is. So each of these 20 businesses has $1 million, but each of them, because of the 5% interest, owes $1,050,000. So that means that $20 million exists as money, electronically or in cash, but $21 million of debt is owed to the bank. So they're literally, and I was an English language teacher for 20 years, so when I say literally, I mean literally. So literally, there is not enough money available to pay back all the debt, right? So there will always be debt, and debt grows like a cancer in the system. And there is simply no avoiding it with debt-based currencies. It is used as a form of social control, and any economist who doesn't recognize that is delusional. So what's the alternative? The alternative is non-debt-based currencies. And the one that I've talked about in some of my videos before is copiosis. Now, I suspect that there are other systems out there as well. In fact, I've come across people talking about them on Twitter before. So I know there are other people talking about alternative systems to debt-based currencies. So my advice is go and have a look at the evidence. Copiosis have a lot of information on their website, copiosis.com. Go and investigate it yourself. I don't want to talk about it in a huge amount of detail here, but it is absolutely a key issue. So systems change. 1, stop the war on drugs. 2, get rid of debt-based currencies. Now that's where we start. Other things will come later, of course, but if we don't have those two things to begin with, everything is so difficult. But if we have those two things, everything becomes so much easier. So start with debt-based currencies, start with stopping the war on drugs, and we'll go from there. So those are the systems changes. The other two things that I wanted to talk about related to psychological change and spiritual growth, consciousness change, consciousness growth, however you want to put it. The first one is healing and trauma. Everyone gets some kind of trauma in their childhood. I mean, some of us get a very small amount, not much, but we all get a bit of trauma. And as a Buddhist, I would relate this back to the first noble truth. The Buddha said, life is dukkha. Dukkha is commonly translated as suffering. So there's no avoiding it. All humans get a certain amount of dukkha. The only two questions are, 1, how much do you get? A bit or a shitload or a medium amount? And the second one is, what is your relationship with that suffering? So depending on what your relationship is, you may make it get bigger or you may make it get smaller. Now, some people get a serious, huge amount of trauma. They're sexually abused in childhood. There was a war in their country, and they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, I don't know what percentage of the human population of planet Earth is walking around with trauma. I don't know. I would be surprised if it was less than 5% suffering from some form of post-traumatic stress disorder. I suspect it may be higher than 10%, but really, I don't know. I'm just kind of pulling these out of the air based on my experience of talking with other people and reading about this subject. So they absolutely need to be. Simon Lord, what should government policies be on hard drugs? Should drugs be legalized? Okay, I'll come back to that in a minute, right? I'll just finish with what I was saying. There needs to be some kind of healing. Now, there are multiple healing modalities out there. Some work well for some people, but not for others, so they need a different approach. So, for example, Dr. Ben Sessa, and you can look at his videos on YouTube, talks about MDMA in conjunction with psychotherapy. And they have particular protocols where the person who's getting the therapy, I think they have 3 or 4 MDMA sessions and 10 sessions in total, 3 or 4 where they have MDMA and the other 6 or 7 where they don't. And it has an absolutely amazing healing effect on many people with trauma. It's absolutely got the best percentages cure rate of post-traumatic stress disorder. So that is one possible healing modality. But you can go and investigate these yourself. And so there absolutely needs to be some form of mass healing. Right, I'll come to that question now. What should government policy be on hard drugs? Should hard drugs be legalized? In my opinion, yes. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no rules relating to it whatsoever. It's not like, 5-year-olds will be able to wander down to the chemist and be able to buy some heroin, for example. This would be restricted to people who are 18. I would suggest that people would have to have some form of education. That might not take very long, but the evidence shows that prohibition doesn't work, and we have to legalize it, and we have to accept that some people will have problematic drug use. I think it's absolutely inevitable. I think that there's a small percentage of people who will always have those things. However, most people, in my view, and I know a lot of people with substance abuse issues, primarily heroin and alcohol, but I've known people with other substance abuse issues. Most of it is to do with trauma in childhood. It's a form of self-medication. So although some people do have a genetic predisposition, it's primarily related to trauma. So my short answer is yes, hard drugs should be legalized, but there should still be rules and regulations about how much you could get from a chemist, for example. And the final thing that I want to talk about, and obviously then I'll go to any more questions, is about visualization and manifestations. So this is a form of meditation, and as I said earlier, I'm a Buddhist convert. I've experimented with many different forms of meditation, and the type of meditation that I'm most suited to is creative visualizations. Now, this is, in my opinion, not a great name for this. Because people get hung up on this word visualization. A lot of people say things like, I'm not good at visualizing. I don't understand how to do it. Now, there's actually 3 different ways you can do a creative visualization meditation. One is visually. So you've got a picture in your mind's eye. The second is with narrative. So you're kind of telling a story. Or you might be using a mantra that's words. And the third is feeling. So there's three ways of doing creative visualizations: visual, narrative, and feeling. Some meditations naturally lend themselves to all three at the same time, or kind of in conjunction, and some naturally lend themselves more to one or the other. And I'm going to talk about this in detail. I'm just going to take a sidestep now. And I'm going to talk about a condition called aphantasia, which, excuse me a moment. I'm going to talk about a condition called aphantasia, partly because I only just found out about it last month. So it's interesting to me, and it relates directly to visualizations. So this condition, aphantasia, apparently it affects approximately 1% of the planet's population, and they have no mind's eye, right? They cannot visualize something in their head. Now, I've watched a few videos on YouTube of people talking about having aphantasia. One of them said something along the lines of, I was watching a film and there was like, this guy was having this inner narrative, this guy was picturing something, and they thought, oh, wouldn't that be great if you could actually picture something in your head? So this person didn't realize that everyone else does this because they didn't have it. So some people don't have the ability to visualize, but most of us do. The second thing that I discovered also last month is some people have no inner dialogue. Now, I found this completely amazing because Buddhism talks about this a lot, the monkey mind. The mind is jumping. You're having these conversations in your head, either a monologue or a dialogue in your own head. And it might, when you hear it, you might hear the voices of your parents or your teacher, but probably once you get to a certain age, it's your own voices. But you're hearing this in your head. But again, approximately, as far as I can tell from the evidence I've seen, about 1% of the planet's population have this condition where they have no inner dialogue. So they can't do the narrative version of visualizations. And a third condition, which is related to psychopathy, which I talk about in my book quite a lot, and I have some videos on, is psychopaths don't feel in the same way that most people do, non-psychopaths. And psychopaths, I mean, the estimates vary, but let's say, again, 1%, maybe 1.5% of the general population, they don't have this feeling ability, or perhaps they do, but it's distinctly different from most people. They certainly don't feel compassion. So there are three parts of visualization, of a creative visualization, but some people are unable to do one, or perhaps unable to do more than one of those three. But most of us have the ability to do all three. Right, now I'm going to talk about creative visualizations in a moment, but first I'll talk a little bit about my evidence. So a lot of what I'm talking comes from Neville Goddard. You can see his videos on YouTube. He talks a lot about manifestation and your word of God, he calls it, your imagination. So, and he talks about feeling is the key. So, for example, if you wanted a visualization, let's have something nice and simple and something physical and practical. You want a house. You want to own your own home. So you could actually visualize the house itself, and that would be part of the visual manifestation. But Neville Goddard talks primarily about the feeling. And he says what you've got to do is imagine the feeling as if it were already there, as if it were already the case that you own the house. So you're not projecting into the future, you're feeling it in the present time. And that's one of the key things. You're doing everything in the present. So Neville Goddard, Dandapani, he's a Hindu monk. He talks about visualizations on YouTube. And Shakti Gawain, I've read a couple of her books about visualizations. I find them excellent. So that's where I'm getting my information from. So for most of us, when we're doing a creative visualization, we're using a combination of narrative, pictures, and feeling. And if you can do all three of those, you are likely to manifest stuff. And this is not woo-woo. Do you know what I mean? It's so for example, I decided I was going to write a book, and here it is. So I manifested this book. Now, I didn't manifest it by using magic. I manifested it by visualizing it and then doing the work, because you've got to do the work as well. It doesn't just appear by magic. So the point is here, first of all, if we can imagine these post-capitalist or game B systems and how they would be, we can bring them into being. So, for example, with the visualization aspect of bringing into being post-capitalist or game B systems, I sometimes use pictures that I get from Star Trek: The Next Generation. So in Star Trek: The Next Generation, they've got this society which is moneyless. Now, they don't really talk about how that's accomplished, but Captain Jean-Luc Picard, in some of the episodes of Star Trek: The Next Generation, does talk about it's a moneyless society, blah, blah, blah. Now, as I say, I don't know how they do it, but those images exist in my head, right? I've seen films and videos about A Beautiful Future, some of them related to, what's his name, Jack Fresco's The Venus Project. So if you look at the Venus Project online, you can see pictures of what this future might be. So for me, I've got that visualization in my head already from other sources. So I don't have to build it. So it can be useful to get these pictures from elsewhere. Now, with the narrative, you're always talking to yourself in the present tense, for one thing. That's one of the rules. And you're always saying it in the positive. So you're not saying there are no debt-based currencies, because are no is a negative. So you might be saying something like, post-capitalist societies have used copiosis. Post-capitalist society use fair systems of exchange, right? That might be part of your narrative. Now, that doesn't sound particularly exciting. Now, this narrative is easier to explain with a creative vision. This narrative is easier to explain with a metta meditation. So metta in Buddhism, M-E-T-T-A, means unconditional love. And metta meditation is a form of meditation in Buddhism. And I use it sometimes. And I use all three of these aspects. So I use the pictures, I use the narrative, and I use the feeling. So with the narrative, there's a very simple mantra in Buddhism. And in English, it goes like this. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be happy. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be well. And that's it. Nice and simple. You just repeat this in your head to yourself, right? That's it. Now, there are longer versions, and some meditations will use mantras in Pali or Hindi, like Om Mani Padme Hum, and you just repeat this in your mind. Now, you could have a narrative that's really complicated if you like telling stories to yourself. And here's another point. Some people are naturally more suited to the visual aspect. Some people are naturally more suited to the narrative aspect, and some people are naturally more suited to the feeling aspect. But ideally, with most of these kinds of meditation, you should be using a combination of all three, although certain specific types of creative visualization are better with one. But I won't talk about those today because that would be getting off track. So the final part is the feeling. So I'll give you an example from my own life. So it's easier with examples. So something that I would like to do in my life in the future is to live on an eco-village. I want to go and live on an eco-village because I've written about non-state forms in my book, but I've never lived on an eco-village, so I don't have that experience. So I thought to myself, how would I feel if I lived on an eco-village? And then I kind of imagined this scenario whereby, I was in a beautiful, house that I built myself or with another person or other people out of using alternative building technology, such as hempcrete. And if I built a house myself out of hempcrete, that would give me a feeling of extreme satisfaction. I know it would. Now, I've had these feelings of extreme satisfaction in the past. So, for example, when I passed my degree, I felt extreme satisfaction that I had accomplished that. When I first started having fluent conversations in Spanish, I felt a sense of great achievement because I grew up monolingual. Until I was 21, the only language I could speak was English. When I wrote my book, I had a feeling of extreme satisfaction. When my daughter turned 18, I had a feeling of it, my world changed because she is now an adult. But I've had lots of these feelings of deep satisfaction in the past over particular things. I mean, my life hasn't all been roses, there's been plenty of, shit things as well. But I have things that I can draw on from my life experience so that I know what that feeling is, so that I can imagine that feeling and feel it now in the moment. So you're feeling that in the moment. So with this form of creative visualization, I know how it would fit, how I would feel if these post-capitalist systems were realized. So I can draw on that. I have pictures in my head that I've got from, say, Star Trek: The Next Generation, other films I've watched, the Venus Project. So I can draw on those. And I can also make my own narrative because, I took 7 years to write this book. So I have a narrative about post-capitalism because I'm completely obsessed with post-capitalism. So that one for me is not a problem. So I'm doing all three of these things, the visualization, the narrative, and the feeling, when I'm trying to manifest things in my own life, but in wider society, in the world, on a certain level, I am trying to manifest these post-capitalist systems or these game B systems into reality. And that's how I do it. Now, I can do it. You can do it. I mean, meditation is a skill. So I'll talk about two skills that I have that I didn't used to have. I can drive a car and I can speak Spanish. Bueno, hablo español porque llevo más o menos un año en México y también un año en España. Y bueno, por eso hablo español. There you go. There's a bit of Spanish. Nothing massively complicated. What was I saying? What was I saying? Someone remind me. I was saying about learning Spanish and what was the other thing? Writing my book. Oh, sorry, learning Spanish and driving a car. So skills. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. I remember when I couldn't drive a car, and driving a car to me seemed absurd. Then I took lessons, I practiced, took my test, I failed it the first time, did some more practice, took my test, I passed it the second time. Now I have a driving license, getting into a car and driving. So that is a skill that humans are not born with, but they have the potential to learn. I couldn't do it, now I can. With Spanish, once upon a time, I didn't know a single word in Spanish. Now I can sit down with someone who doesn't speak English and is a native Spanish speaker, and I can have a fairly normal conversation with them. That is a skill that I couldn't do when I was 21 years old. I can do it now. Meditation is the same. If you put in enough practice, you will learn that skill. I mean, it's that simple. It's the same as driving. It's the same as learning a language. It's the same as any skill. Put the time in, you'll master it. If you've got the right technique. Now, with creative visualizations, as I've said, there's 3 parts to it. Of course, there's far more details. Watch the videos of Dan Darney, read some of the books of Shakti Gawain. But the principle is fairly simple. You just spend a bit of time every day doing it. Now, if you can afford to spend 20 minutes twice or 3 times a week, great. That's a fantastic starting point. Later on, you want to be doing it every day. But if you're getting started 2 or 3 times a week, 20 minutes to half an hour, off you go. So basically, that covers what I wanted to say in answer to the question, how would you transition from where we are now with game A, ideological late stage capitalism, to post-capitalist game B systems. So as I say, I don't know all the details, but as a starting point, 1, end the war on drugs. 2, get rid of all debt-based currencies, replace them with non-debt-based currencies such as copiosis. 3, there has to be healing of trauma. And 4, use some form of meditation to bring it into the world. And I recommend creative visualizations. So, as I say, that was what I wanted to say. If you would like to put in a question, I'm open to questions. Otherwise, I'll end the live stream earlier. Dun, dun, dun. Right, if I haven't got a question in the next 20 seconds, I'm going to end the live stream because, you know. Okay, well, thank you for giving me your time today. Peace.